12 days of missiles, blood, and brinkmanship. Israel bombed, Iran retaliated, the U.S. intervened, and now the world waits for diplomacy or another detonation. But Tehran has made one thing clear: no negotiations without guarantees. Not with American bombers still circling, and not with Israeli warplanes still itching to strike. On the 1st of July, Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi issued a blunt ultimatum. Unless the U.S. pledges to halt all military action during dialogue, there will be no return to the nuclear talks, period. This isn't just about centrifuges. It's about sovereignty, honor, and survival. With over 935 Iranians dead, thousands injured, and America's B-2 bombers targeting Iran's nuclear infrastructure just days earlier, Tehran is drawing a line in the sand. The message is simple: respect or regret. And as the dust settles over Fordo, Natanz, and Isfahan, a familiar voice returns. Morgan Freeman once warned, "When force replaces diplomacy, you lose control of both." Washington should listen. Stay with us as we break down the crisis. The missile storm that depleted U.S. defenses, the high cost of THAAD, Iran's strategic gamble, and the growing possibility that the next war will be Israel's last. And tell us what you think. Has the West crossed the point of no return? Comment below. To understand how close we came to all-out war, we need to go back to where it all started, the 13th of June. The escalation began on the 13th of June, when Israel launched its most extensive air assault campaign against Iran in recent history. This was not a limited strike. It was a coordinated and sustained bombing operation targeting everything from military bases to nuclear research facilities to civilian infrastructure. According to Iran's Ministry of Health, the number of fatalities stood officially at 610. However, press television reported that the actual death toll exceeded 935, with more than 5,300 people injured, many of them severely. Among those killed were senior commanders of the Revolutionary Guard, prominent nuclear scientists, and engineers who had worked for years to advance Iran's civilian nuclear capacity. Sites like Fordow, Natanz, and Isfahan were struck with precision-guided munitions, some of them suspected to have originated from outside Israeli territory. The intent, thinly veiled, was strategic decapitation to destroy not only Iran's nuclear capability, but its morale, its deterrence posture, and its ability to resist coercion. And yet, the result was exactly the opposite. Within mere hours of the strikes, Iranian missile forces launched a coordinated counter-assault, using both older platforms like Ghadar and Imad, and more modern systems such as Khaybar Shekan and Fateh 1. They rained warheads on Israeli targets. According to a damage report released by Hebrew University in Jerusalem, 29 Israeli citizens lost their lives, and over 3,400 were wounded, including military personnel. Dozens of cities in Israel's north and center came under bombardment. Critical infrastructure like energy grids and military radar outposts were temporarily disabled. Tehran's message was clear. Deterrence had not been dismantled, it had been activated. The regional balance of power, already brittle, began to tilt dangerously. But as the missiles flew, the attention of the world shifted, not to diplomacy, but to Washington. Because the next move would not come from Tel Aviv, it would come from the Pentagon. But when Washington chose to join the battlefield directly, it unleashed a new level of escalation that the world hadn't seen since the early 2000s. On the 22nd of June, the conflict crossed a critical threshold. U.S. President Donald Trump authorized the deployment of B-2 stealth bombers to strike Iran's most fortified nuclear facilities. These weren't symbolic attacks. The B-2 fleet targeted deeply buried bunkers in Fordo and Isfahan, using bunker-penetrating ordnance designed to neutralize hardened sites. Simultaneously, U.S. Navy destroyers in the Gulf launched cruise missiles at a third location, bringing the total of direct U.S.-struck nuclear assets to 3. President Trump later declared, quote, "We erased their nuclear program." But in reality, what the United States erased was its own strategic leverage. To defend Israel from potential retaliation, the U.S. relied heavily on its Terminal High Altitude Area Defense System, also known as THAAD. According to Military Watch magazine, within just 12 days, between 15 to 20% of the global THAAD interceptor stockpile was consumed, and operational costs surpassing $800 million US. Each THAAD missile, depending on configuration and development costs, now exceeds $18 million per unit, and in some calculations, up to $27 million when including testing, logistics, and research expenditures. This means that during a single week of fighting, the Pentagon expended more on missile defense than Ukraine received in 2 months of aid. And the performance? Far from stellar. In the month prior to the conflict, THAAD units stationed in Israel failed to intercept 2 ballistic missiles launched by the Houthi faction in Yemen. One was taken out by Israel's Arrow system. The other landed near Ben Gurion International Airport. During the Iran conflict, despite radar upgrades and combined fire control, at least several Iranian warheads still broke through. Even with support from Patriot systems and naval-based interceptors, the shield was leaking. Morgan Freeman, the renowned actor and narrator whose voice has guided audiences through countless stories of conflict and consequence, framed the failure with sobering clarity. He said, quote, "When your defense costs more than the war itself, you're not fighting a conflict, you're bleeding a treasury." And indeed, THAAD has become a metaphor for U.S. foreign policy: expensive, fragile, and overpromised. The strategic implications are far-reaching. With a depleted missile inventory, the U.S. is now more vulnerable, not only in the Middle East, but also in the Pacific and Eastern Europe. Every THAAD launcher moved to Israel is one less protecting U.S. assets in Guam or South Korea. Iran's barrage didn't just pressure Israel, it exposed the logistical overextension of American global commitments, and Washington, once again, finds itself paying a premium to fight wars it cannot win outright in regions it no longer controls. And as Tehran prepares for the next phase, it is clear that U.S. defenses, no matter how costly, will not hold back a nation fighting on principle and pride. In the shadowed halls of Tehran's defense apparatus, a stark conclusion is being discussed. The next military confrontation with Israel might not just be another war, it could be the last one. This isn't mere rhetoric. According to a senior Iranian official quoted by RT, the Iranian command now believes it has identified and validated Israel's core weaknesses. The recent 12-day exchange wasn't just retaliation, it was reconnaissance in force. Missile trajectories, radar response times, and interceptor patterns were all mapped, tested, and fed into Iran's strategic calculations. Weak points were noted: gaps in the THAAD umbrella, inconsistent response intervals from the Iron Dome, and the lack of multi-layered redundancy in Israel's northern defense grid. That knowledge, Tehran believes, gives them a decisive edge. The officials said it plainly. Another war with Israel may well be the final one, not because Iran seeks escalation for its own sake, but because it now holds the capacity to saturate Israeli airspace to a point of collapse. Iran is estimated to possess tens of thousands of precision and semi-precision missiles. These range from older platforms like Ghadar and Imad to modern medium-range systems like the Khaybar Shikan and the cutting-edge Fatah-1 hypersonic missile, which can reach speeds up to Mach 15. During the June conflict alone, Iran launched several hundred. But Tehran's defense planners say that in a future scenario, they are prepared to unleash multiple salvos daily, several hundred per day if required. Each barrage would come with diversified speeds, trajectories, and payloads, overwhelming any layered missile defense network. Beyond firepower, Tehran has consolidated national resolve. Inside Iran, state media, religious leaders, and military figures all echo a single message. This is a historical opportunity, not merely to defend against aggression, but to permanently neutralize the Israeli threat. For the first time in decades, even the Iranian diaspora is echoing this sentiment. Communities that once distanced themselves from Tehran's rhetoric are now organizing in solidarity, raising funds, and advocating publicly. In Iranian cities, slogans about sovereignty, Jerusalem, and resistance saturate every platform, from subway walls to prayer sermons. The narrative has shifted. Israel is no longer seen as untouchable. It is now viewed as vulnerable, overextended, and politically divided. And yet, this isn't a war cry, it's a doctrine born not from desperation, but calculation. Tehran believes it now holds escalation dominance, that any Israeli preemptive action can be met with a level of retaliation that cripples not just military assets, but morale and governance. That belief, whether accurate or not, is guiding strategy now. And while Iran prepares for the next war, the U.S. is already struggling to justify the last one, both financially and politically. After nearly 2 weeks of war and a fragile ceasefire mediated by Washington taking effect on the 24th of June, a new chapter was supposed to begin. But Iran isn't turning the page just yet. On the 1st of July, Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi made Tehran's position crystal clear. There will be no negotiations unless we are assured explicitly that no military actions will take place during dialogue. This isn't a stalling tactic. It's a demand born of blood and memory. After 12 days of destruction, Tehran will not accept smiles across the negotiation table while warplanes circle overhead. According to the Iranian Foreign Ministry, the call for security guarantees follows a discreet meeting between Iranian representatives and U.S. envoy Steve Witkoff. It was Washington's attempt to reset the diplomatic clock, but Iran isn't resetting anything. Araghchi's remarks were pointed. He said, "This is not merely about centrifuges or uranium enrichment. This is about national dignity." For Tehran, the nuclear program is no longer just about energy or deterrence. It has become a symbol of sovereign resolve, of independence from Western coercion. Dismantling it under pressure would be tantamount to surrendering national identity. Meanwhile, Iran is not just demanding assurances, it's demanding accountability. The Iranian government has submitted a formal letter to the United Nations, requesting that both the U.S. and Israel be held financially and legally responsible for the damages sustained during the recent conflict. According to Iranian sources, the strikes destroyed civilian infrastructure, hospitals, and educational facilities, not just military sites. Tehran's demand is a calculated move, signaling that if the West continues to view negotiations as a tool of manipulation, Iran will escalate the issue to international legal forums and forums of global opinion. What is perhaps most telling is what Iran has not said. It has not signaled any return to the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action under previous terms. It has not offered timelines. It has not entertained token gestures. This is a government that feels it has leverage, military, moral, and strategic. As long as American bombers continue to loiter over the Gulf and Israeli officials continue to threaten new strikes, talks are off the table. And while Iran demands stability before peace, Washington still clings to a myth the idea that security can be enforced by force alone. The 12-day confrontation may have ended in a ceasefire, but it opened a longer chapter, one of introspection, miscalculation, and sobering realities for the West. The United States, despite deploying advanced interceptors, air support, and logistical backing, emerged from the exchange with more questions than answers. It lost interceptors. It lost credibility. Israel, meanwhile, suffered a blow to its aura of invincibility. But Iran, it emerged, emboldened. For the first time since the Islamic Revolution in 1979, Iranian officials are publicly speaking not of survival, but of strategic victory. That shift is historic. U.S. President Donald Trump, perhaps sensing the shifting narrative, declared online on the 30th of June that we erased their nukes. I won't even talk to them. It was a defiant tone, but the facts don't support it. Iran's nuclear facilities may have suffered damage, but not annihilation. Much of the critical infrastructure is buried deep, protected by reinforced tunnels, and spread across undisclosed locations. Western analysts concede privately that any assumption of total destruction is, at best, premature. Yet the West doubles down. More sanctions, more threats, more deployments. The assumption remains that Iran will eventually fold, that economic pressure will bring about political collapse. But this is the same logic that failed in Cuba, failed in Venezuela, and failed in North Korea. As the years pass, the sanctions do damage, but they also steal national resolve. The longer Iran is cornered, the less likely it becomes to compromise. What was once negotiable is now sacred. Uranium enrichment is no longer a policy, it's a doctrine of defiance. Morgan Freeman, with his timeless wisdom and gravitas, once said, "You can't intimidate a nation whose people are prepared to die before surrendering." That warning, dismissed by many in Washington, is now proving prophetic. Iran's losses were real. Its suffering was deep, but its posture has hardened, not softened. The West's assumption that airstrikes buy leverage is failing. The next steps remain unclear. Will the West pivot to diplomacy with humility or continue with punitive arrogance? Will Israel strike again? Will the U.S. extend more interceptors and expend more fortunes on a conflict it cannot resolve? For now, the skies are silent. But silence, as history teaches, is never peace. It is only the pause between decisions. And with the world watching, it may be the West's next move, not Iran's, that determines whether this silence becomes resolution or renewed fire. Iran's message is unmistakable. Peace is possible, but not at gunpoint. The West can return to the table, but only if it leaves its warships and bombers at the door. The next round of talks, if they happen, won't be about concessions. They'll be about survival and respect. From Tehran to Tel Aviv, from Washington to Vienna, the stakes are no longer theoretical, they're nuclear, they're real. And they're now, as Morgan Freeman reminded us, nations don't collapse from defeat, but from denial. The West should take note, because this isn't just Iran's red line.